Good morning. Oh, this is going to be fun. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tommy, and I am here today to kick off our conversation about our justice partnerships. My real name is Thomas Allen Garvin V. My dad is right here in the front today. And happy Father's Day and a joyful Juneteenth. My pronouns are he and they. I am black and very, very queer. The next 4 weeks is all about our justice partnerships that we launched this year, tipping towards love, chasing healing, and choosing liberation. And what a beautiful day to kick off a conversation about liberation as we think about Juneteenth. It's a day that we mark memory as community. It's a day of ritual. And it comes from this long line of emancipation celebrations that started with my ancestors from enslavement and bondage. The Black church had a massive role in bringing community together. And even though it was just federally recognized last year as a holiday, we have been doing these celebrations for centuries. It stretches before the end of the Civil War and practices that my ancestors did to remember our humanity. It's to remember land stolen from us, to remember our culture in spite of. Juneteenth is both this celebration and this reunion as we mourn our ancestors' loss, as families were reunited as they got the news of emancipation because people didn't want to give up their economy. They were making money off of people's bodies. And so perhaps the way we commemorate and offer respect to this sacred tradition today is looking towards the practice of liberation as community. Audre Lorde says, without community, there is no liberation. So I want to invite you into an experiment with me. And before, let me just preface this with a few things. You have complete agency to engage in this however you want. So we're going to talk to each other. The introverts were like, oh God. Right? So you can use this time as a personal reflection, or you can look around, see someone you don't know. Maybe you want to get to know a little bit better. No more than 2 to 5 people per group. And then we also want to invite those watching online into the experience. There should be a Zoom link in the chat if you want to participate. But again, big thing, agency. So you don't have to talk to people if you don't want to. Ask consent if this is your own time for personal reflection. That's completely okay. So we're going to ask this question: how do you want community to show up for you? And how do you want to show up in community? Before we do that, here's some agreements that we're going to go into this space with. Be open, respect each other's stories, and listen with empathy. We're going to take about 5 minutes. Feel free to move around, make yourselves comfortable. This time is yours, and we'll come back together with a scripture reading, okay? So go for it. All right. I'm going to finish up, and then we'll come back together. Thank you so much. Remember those conversations? Remember what you talked about? All right, let's see. Remember what you talked about? We're going to come back to it, so hold on to that. But Let's ground ourselves this morning in a reading of Acts chapter 2, verse 40 through 46. Then we'll have some remarks, some questions, some reflections. And so, Apostle Peter, went on in this vein for a long time, urging them over and over, get out while you still can. Get out of this sick and stupid culture. That day, about 3,000 took him at his word and were baptized and were signed up. They committed themselves to the teaching of the apostles, the life together, the common meal, and the prayers. And everyone around was in awe. All those wonders and signs done through the apostles. And all the believers lived in a wonderful harmony. Holding everything in common, they sold whatever they owned and pooled their resources so that each person's need was met. They followed a daily discipline of worship in the temple, followed by meals at home, every meal a celebration, exuberant and joyful as they praised God. People in general liked what they saw every day, and their numbers grew as God added to those who were saved. So thank you for being vulnerable, for taking the opportunity to chat with each other. I know that can bring up a lot of feelings in the body. Like, again, for some of you who are like, I have to talk to people, you probably got a little bit sweaty. The palms were like, oh no, this is awful. What did I get myself into? Maybe as the conversation continued on, like you felt your body ease a little bit and was like, oh, these people are kind of cool. They're a little normal. Probably had a range. All those experiences are welcome. So why did we do that? What was the point of talking to each other and taking this moment of reflection, and how might it apply to what we just read? So to understand that, I'm going to tell you about a few things. I'm going to tell you about a date with a pastor, a promise, a directive, something really messy, how we show up, and then offer some final notes on community, this partnership, and beloved community. And so, this story starts about 2015 when I first started going here to Watershed. I went on a date with a pastor, Matt O'Neill. So, if you know, at that time it was more of a co-pastor model. Matt and Scott would alternate weeks. And I had gotten kicked out of a spiritual community, and I was looking for a community to kind of place my feet on solid ground here. And I couldn't tell. I was like, I need a community that's welcoming. I don't necessarily need a community that's affirming, but I couldn't tell which one, if Watershed was either, right? And some friends had posted, this is a weird church. They sang Whitney Houston. And I was like, oh, let me go check that out. And so I was going, and I decided to ask the question, where do y'all stand on the issue of affirming? And to understand that, you need to know that I like to know the rules of engagement. I like to play it safe. It's how I navigate safety. It comes from my trauma. I want to know where I belong, when do you want me to show up, when can I leave? Tell me where you want me, tell me where you don't want me. And part of that is I'm always trying to prepare for the emotional reaction and anticipate that, right? And it ties back to a loss of community, because in my brain, if I can prepare myself, it's going to hurt less if I lose community. And so we're down the street at this salad bar that's no longer there. Thank you, gentrification in Charlotte. And I asked the question, to which Matt gave a very roundabout answer. If you're just new here, we use numbers a lot. It's the Enneagram, so just FYI. So 9s is like this peacemaker thing. We don't want to rock the boat. I'm not a 9, I'm a 2. But Matt gave this roundabout answer about not being fully affirming, to which I said, cool, I just need a place that's not going to kick me out. I was willing to take the crumbs, so to speak. And that was the promise, this low-hanging fruit of you have a place here. I just needed a community that would not shun me like the community of my youth did. A community that was in struggle with me, a community that was present with me. In community, there is struggle. And I think this struggle kicked up a notch June 12th, 2016, about a year later, we have been having conversations here about what does it look like to bring a community together, and that's what you know of Kindred today. But on June 12th, a gunman walked into a nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and murdered over 40 people. And that was the day that a lot of us said, no more. So the next week, 6 years to this day, June 19th, in a talk called Bears Are Easier to Spot Than Sharks, this came from the stage, and I'm quoting it verbatim from Matt O'Neill. He said, "Watershed has to be a safe place for anyone interested in exploring their spiritual life, cultivating intimacy with God, or helping bring hope or healing to a broken world or themselves. This has to be true for someone who is gay, straight, Muslim, Christian, atheist, agnostic, Catholic, Jew, male, female, black, white, Asian, Republican, Democrat, everyone. It has to be safe." He ended with, "That will also mean it's going to get really messy." Heard that. So something messy, right? Solidarity and struggle is messy. There were some truths emerging about what it meant to show up in community that had us asking, how do we show up in this moment to each other? And just to put that in political context, so we're having the election of Donald Trump, and then the white evangelical church demographic was really enthused about Donald Trump, and that caused a lot of consternation, a lot of family separation, right? We were also here in this community waking up to empire and colonization, the need to reckon with our Christian story, its central role in colonization, the ways it wove itself into empire, becoming a tool of oppression instead of a tool of liberation. We had to reckon with our story that said, go and take that land for gold, for glory, and for God, giving a cover for the displacement of peoples. So when I use this term decolonize here, we had to decolonize the church. That word might be uncomfortable for some of you. But what I mean is we had to reclaim a faith that detangles itself from being a tool of empire and erasure of the divinity and humanity of other cultures. A place that set itself apart from the powers and principalities that impose needless hardships on the body, the mind, and the spirit. This is struggle. It's hard. Struggle, I've learned after, last year I took this course called Decolonize the Church. And we explored struggle and solidarity and how to decolonize, what that might even look like. And Reverend Brandon Rencher, along with his wife, led this course. And he offered this definition of struggle. Struggle relates to nonviolent collective resistance of external policies, norms, and systems that diminish the abundant life God intends for all creation. It's a mouthful. To me, this sounds like holy struggle, right? And just a side note on the nonviolent piece, a lot of us have a real whitewashed image about what nonviolent struggle is. It doesn't just mean without like fists or without fighting. Often it is this action in which we ourselves don't engage in violence, but violence then is imposed upon us because we're disrupting normativity. Maybe this is what we were being invited into in Acts, that passage that we just read. As we recall, he, the Apostle Peter, went on in this vein for a long time, urging them over and over, get out while you can, get out of this sick and stupid culture. Other translations read that, get out of this corrupt culture. Really strong words. What's happening right here? So let's put this in some context. These were Jewish people, still practicing Jewish customs and traditions, who found themselves on the margins of their society. And if we want to dig deeper, there are wonderful Jewish teachers alive today that can take us into a deeper meaning of that. We want to be open to that. But in Acts, we find ourselves here at the drama of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came down and there was like this fire upon their head, and they started speaking in tongues, and people thought they were drunk, and they were like, no, we just love God. Right? But to really understand that, you need to understand the Jewish festival of Shavuot, or the Jewish Pentecost. And this was about 51 days or so after Passover. It was a time to gather the first reapings of the wheat harvest. It was a time of joy, a celebration. The Jewish people commemorated receiving the Torah, or the law, and they participated in ritual that reminded them of their connection to the earth, to its abundance. The rituals had rhythms with the seasons and the land. We contextualize this even more to the time and place where Jews are experiencing rising economic oppression, opposition from the Roman Empire, and incessant warfare. What did they do? They committed themselves to the teachings of the apostles, the life together, the common meal, the prayers. They sold whatever they owned and pooled their resources so that each person's need was met. They took care of each other. They struggled together. The later chapters in Acts and Romans tell us how the struggle continued, and as their fellowship expanded, they began to expand beyond their own ethnic boundaries and included Gentiles. And this created a lot of conflict and a lot of tension in the church. But they took care of one another. They sold their resources. If you're feeling a little uncomfortable at that, just hold that tension. Just hold that there. Notice it. There was a personal cost. This is solidarity. Taking what appears scarce or lacking and saying, no, we have enough for you. We have enough for a community. This is also the foundation of the church. At least a brief and very loose story about it, okay? So at the intersections of Holy Spirit, community, and disruption, they begin to understand each other across difference and care for each other's needs. We call this solidarity. Reverend Brandon posits on solidarity this way. He says, solidarity is community building and care to share in joy and suffering, especially with the most marginalized, in order for there to strive to be no lack within the community. So it seems to me that struggle has this potential to lead to solidarity. This collective struggle together makes way for solidarity together. And I think in that vein, Watershed derives this mission that we're a community struggling and loving together as though a different world is possible today. But I think that begs us to ask the question, how do we show up? How do we show up to and for ourselves? How do we show up to and for others? How does the way that we show up for ourselves affect the way that we show up for others and in community? Today is 6 years that we have stepped into this publicly affirming posture. 6 years since that bold vision of what community could be here. And we've continued to transform and be transformed. We've had to open up to really painful truths. At times we've struggled living into that vision. But isn't that true for most of us in our personal lives? That is marked by struggle, that we struggle, that we have these visions of the goals of the people who we want to be, and often we are failing to reach that mark, right? But it is okay. The work is in the struggle. our system is so individualized that we forget that what happens at the individual level affects us collectively. We're waking up to systems that we've been a part of, and it's hard, embodied work. You'll hear me often say, check in with your body. How is your body doing? My ancestors were not allowed to check in with their bodies. Being bodied is resistance. It's holy work. I remember that promise of being a safe community as well. I don't think a community in struggle can be a safe community, if I'm honest. And I don't know if a safe community is what we're being called into as much as I think we're being called into a radical community. And if that word is really uncomfortable for you, all radical means is complete. A community that is complete. To that, we have this, I don't know if you've seen our liberation statement here. This is aspirational. It says here at Watershed, liberation means living in the world as this actually is, but loving as if we believe a different world is possible. And living in the world as it is, we prioritize the truth lived on the margins because too often it's the powerful who tell the stories of history. By loving as if we believe a different world is possible, we differentiate between the unjust and dehumanizing narratives that enslave the people who hold to them, working to dismantle those narratives, convinced that liberation first for the oppressed is also liberation for the oppressor. Our action is therefore guided by the legacy and leadership of those on the margins who have been struggling for liberation for centuries, whose lament informs our humility and whose joyful resistance in the face of injustice animates our hope. Big aspirations. And it is hard. It is hard for us to not succumb to a us versus them mentality. It is hard to navigate our fear and shame. It's no strangers here. There are systems that are determined to impose the restrictions of responsibility on our bodies. And it really replicates these conditions of bondage and perpetual servitude. It's hard to recognize systems of patriarchal thought and acknowledge the harms that live within us. It's hard to recognize this system of patriarchy and not be absorbed in its narrative surrounding fatherhood or even motherhood. It's hard not to reduce people down to their political party alignments. It's hard to lift your voice up and advocate for yourself when you've been hurt by a community. It's hard to speak truth to power. It's hard to witness the pain of the marginalized. It's possibly harder to listen to their demands. It's hard to show up. It's messy. At times it's even dangerous. But I'm a little reckless. And I have just enough faith and hope and lived experience in this queer body to know that radical community is possible. I come from a tradition and a family that takes care of each other, that is a strong community. It is possible. And I think you think it's possible too. At least that's what I'm learning as I get to know you. I get to help build an experience of interdependence here, though I'm only one of all of us that are doing this work. But I should mention some supportive structures that we've come up with to help practice this solidarity, this interdependence. And so one of those things, I guess I'll tell you a little bit about me and my nursing career and how I got here to this moment. Spirituality runs deep in me. It is important to me. Pastoring runs deep through my body. My dad does it. My grandparents did it. All the women in my family, in some way, shape, or form, pastor in one way. My sister did it for me when I came out and she sat me down and she affirmed her love for me. And for those who don't know me, my professional background is in healthcare. I've been a surgical tech. I've worked in labor and delivery, critical care, and I've loved the study of holistic nursing. But that led me to want to desire to understand the mind more, to learn about the body more, the spirit connection, and that put me in the study of mental health. I started learning about how oppression and lack of resources wear on the body in catastrophic ways, how mental health and spiritual health are intimately tied together, and that led me to ask, what are some practices that can assist us in living into a fuller, more inclusive, a bigger vision of health together? Which led me to realize there's this thing apparently called parish nursing. Like, okay, cool. Which led me to take more classes and get more knowledge and more experience into spiritual direction school with this really amazing organization called Mystic Soul Spirit School. It is a school meant to empower queer, trans, disabled, Black, and indigenous people to incorporate a deeper spiritual care and practice into the communities we serve. And all of that goes into how you see me show up today. I facilitate change and transition. I am a nurse, a spiritual director, a facilitator, a care coordinator, and more. So how do we show up on this journey of community and change? So I guess I want to tell y'all a little bit about this project that we're working on right now. So some of you here may have been at the community roundtables a few months ago where we got some feedback about what do you need in community? How have you been hurt? What are some harms? And overwhelmingly, y'all said that you want a space to experience shared family or chosen family. We're craving it. We're needing to dream a new dream of community because we've all been through trauma. We've all had to navigate really hard things. We've all felt alone. We all feel overwhelmed. And it's not our fault. There's a book by Mia Birdsong called How We Show Up. And I want to read a little excerpt to you that really contextualizes why this is so hard. We're under this dream, this American dream. And she has some really insightful insights. She says, the American dream is both an illusion and an aspiration. It is a false promise and real potential. It is a jumble of contradictions. The American dream's narrowly defined paths to happiness and success rely on an acceptance of prescribed roles and a lot of accumulation and exhibition. It is the quintessential self-made man, and it is almost always a man, who is self-sufficient, confident, stoic, righteously industrious, performatively heterosexual, and powerful. On the surface, it looks like that idea has evolved in some ways. We have our Beyoncés, our Baracks, and our Buttigiegs. Say that word 5 times fast. But that doesn't mean the American dream has become liberated from its origins or that its promise of freedom is more free. It just means that more of us are permitted entry into the club if we do the double duty of conforming to its standards and continuing to meet the ones set out for us. Women must lean in. Queer couples must get married. People of color must be master code switchers. Perhaps most damaging, it includes a toxic individualism that creates barriers to deep connection and intimacy. When we are oriented towards doing it ourselves and getting ours, we cut ourselves off from the kinds of relationships that can only be built when we allow ourselves to be more open and generous. It's messy. I want to hold on to this concept of this self-made man or this man box. Dr. Hillary McBride in The Wisdom of Your Body, she articulated it as a man box. Holding that with the fact that it's Father's Day. And raising kids is hard. Reparenting yourself is hard. We all have experienced trauma, abuses. For some, today is a day of joy and celebration. Some never knew their fathers. Some are trying to heal generational traumas around fatherhood. Some are trying to break out of this stifling man box into a more intimate experience. Some are feeling so burdened by an image of fathering that no longer works for them. Some fathers carry shame for what they don't know. Some are grieving the loss of dear fathers and fathers they never knew. Some come guilty to this day because maybe you don't have a deep, intimate, emotional connection to your father, and that is okay too. However you show up is okay. I think we're being called to show up in community, to all do the fathering. Without community, there is no liberation. So what might help us show up? I want to leave us today grounded in 4 practices. And notice I said practices. That means that you won't get these perfectly. Practice over perfection. The first thing I want to offer us is that we dream a new dream, that we use our imagination. Every worthwhile spiritual direction session I've led, every coaching session I've led, every consulting session I've led, I've asked this question: if you had a magic wand to fix anything in your life, what would that look like? Give yourself some permission to dream. Giving ourselves permission to dream and imagine without limits is imperative to bringing a better vision of community to realization. What is possible? Practice hope. Hope is a practice. Rebecca Solnit, in her book Hope in the Dark, said, "Hope is an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable." Mirame Kaba, a lovely prison abolitionist, says that hope is a discipline. She says, "I choose to act in a different way. I choose to trust people until they prove themselves untrustworthy." Hope is faith in action. Hope does not excuse itself from action. Hope is a discipline. Last week, I want to carry this through line because I think it's so important, it's so pivotal. Last week at communion, Matt talked about radical empathy, and I just want to read what that is again to us. Radical empathy is this work to educate oneself, to listen with a humble heart, to understand another's experience from their perspective, not as we imagine we would feel. Radical empathy is not about you and what you think or what you would do in a situation you've never been in and perhaps never will. It's the kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it. Radical empathy. These are practices. They're messy. We won't get it right. There will be conflict. The last one is probably most difficult. It's most difficult for me, but I'm going to try to model it for you here today. And it comes from this facilitation method called the Circle Way, and it's also rooted in this practice of mutual aid. Ask for what you need, offer what you can. So some of you know that I left a corporate job last year to pursue this ministry work, this work of being in radical solidarity with community. And so I'm here asking for your support in that, right? So this partnership is a piece of that. Watershed does help me support that a little bit. But there's going to be a link, and it's going to list all these other ways that you can support me. So we have a Patreon community where we're learning how to be in our bodies. And we're also learning about what are the systems that affect us and how we show up to each other. We get to practice showing up in community. We get to move from this charity model to this mutual aid model, where charity sort of has this hierarchy, this I have something that you need. Mutual aid says, no, we need each other together. Ask for what you need. Offer what you can. I need support. I can't do this work without you. Does that mean that I'll never work at another corporate job? I don't know. But I'm enjoying the focus of being here and present with you. I'm enjoying this focus of bridging the gaps of community and understanding myself too. And I get to help you all do that. We all get to help each other do that. Ask for what you need. Offer what you can. So I said, hold on to those conversations. We're going to get back together in those groups again. Just one caveat. Same question. With hope and dreaming in mind, how do you want to show up in community? How do you want community to show up for you? How will you practice? Take another 5 minutes, and then we'll close out together. Go be with each other. I want to invite you to hold those conversations and continue them after we finish, but I figured we could end today in a meditation, and you can still be like in circles and with each other and together. Like the purpose of doing this all is to move our bodies in a way that demonstrates community. So this moving, this gathering together, the conversations, they're also good. The work of being a community that follows this Christ directive to care for one another is struggle. And though we read some really hard language in scriptures, we each have to decide how we individually show up together for the collective. It is struggle. Asking for your needs in an individualistic world is struggle. But this is care work. So, as we finish out today, I want us to be in community together and meditate on this passage here in Romans, chapter 12. I think it's just a beautiful call and reflection to how we want to be. And I think it's on the screen. The Romans 12, there we go. So just let the words kind of wash over you. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. Your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life. Place it before God as an offering. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You will be changed from the inside out. Unlike the culture around you always dragging you down to his level of immaturity, God brings out the best of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. In this way, we are like the various parts of a human body. Each part gets its meaning from the body as a whole and not the other way around. The body we are talking about is Christ's body. Each of us finds our meaning and function as part of Christ's body. So since we find ourselves fashioned into all these things, excellently formed, marvelously functioning parts in Christ's body, let us just go ahead and be what we were made to be, without enviously or pridefully comparing ourselves with each other or trying to be something we aren't. If you preach, just preach God's message, nothing else. If you help, just help. Don't take over. If you teach, stick to your teaching. If you give encouraging guidance, be careful that you don't get bossy. If you're put in charge, don't manipulate. If you're called to give aid to people in distress, keep your eyes open. Be quick to respond. If you work with the disadvantaged, don't let yourself get irritated with them or depressed by them. Keep a smile on your face. Love from the center of who you are. Don't fake it. Run for dear life from evil. Hold on for dear life to good. Be good friends who love deeply. Play music. Don't burn out. Keep yourselves fueled and aflamed. Don't quit in hard times. Pray all the harder. Help needy Christians. Be inventive in hospitality. Bless your enemies. No cursing or grumbling. Laugh with your happy friends when they're happy. Share tears when they're down. Get along with each other. Don't be stuck up. Make friends with nobodies. Don't be the great somebody. Don't hit back. Discover beauty in everyone. If you got it in you, get along with everybody. Don't insist on getting even. That's not for everybody to do. I'll do the judging, says God. I will take care of it. May you be in peace. May you practice. May we all be moving towards that community that is possible today.